And there we go. All right, so now we're officially set off and rolling. Welcome to the first conversation for Hear Me Out, which I'm really excited for. I think it is really amazing when we can have transparent, honest, authentic conversations, and especially have access to those who are in positions of power and live so openly and transparently. I think that that is really inspiring. So I'm really excited to be in conversation with Adam Lippin, who is the CEO and founder of HearMe. I think he's the perfect person to kick this conversation off with because, HearMe really leans into empathy and peer-to-peer support. And this is his vision, and we all, we get to be a part of it, especially as listeners, or if you're new to HearMe. Um, so like this is just such an honor. So let me go ahead and just spotlight for everyone because Adam is amazing. All right. So Adam, feel free if you're not already unmuted. I don't want to do a disservice because you live so openly and authentically. Please, for those who may not know you, just share a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So, hello, everyone. My name is Adam Lippin. I'm the founder and CEO of HearMe. And prior to that, I have had a few other businesses, and it's all sort of related. So, do you want me to go into my story now, or is that enough for right now?
Yeah, I think your story's great because it sets the context for this whole conversation. So please share a little bit about your story.
Okay. So, just before I start, BJ basically alluded to or said that, I live my life very authentically out and I'm sort of who I am. And that is very true. I'm also in my 50s, and this was not true up until about, 10 or 11 years ago. And my life has been a struggle to sort of like not live in different compartments. I compartmentalized everything. And I think the only way to get to a universal truth is when we share our own stories, because when people relate to our stories, then they can relate, or there's universality to it. So, I guess I'll go into some specifics. And, I do want to say that I think everyone that grows up LGBTQIA, there is an original wound. There is this original feeling of not feeling a sense of connectedness and a feeling of having to hide, and this very internalized sense of shame, which colored for me, sort of my whole life. And it started really early. I don't even know how old I was. I was probably 2 or 3 or 4. And I remember my sisters, I have 2 older sisters, and they didn't have a shirt on, and they went like this to cover their breasts, right? Even though they were pubescent. So I did the same thing. And I don't remember exactly who said what to me, but I was shamed for it. Like, boys don't do that. And that stuck with me. And that made me feel, even though I probably didn't fully understand it at the time, gave me a real sense of separation. So just relatively quickly, I knew I was gay when I was young. And it felt very unsafe for me because I felt like I couldn't, share that. And I constructed ways of being and acting to sort of hide it. And my immediate family, and I come from a very loving family that's, liberal, New York, the whole bit. And even with that, and my mom she had a doctorate in human sexuality. And even with all that, that's sort of like everything sort of like on third base running towards home. I remember my grandmother talking about the fagulas, right? And I remember driving, and my mom actually for her work would do like field trips to gay bars in the city. And she would tell these stories, and there was always a twinge of sort of like making fun of people, right? They were told in exaggerated stories like, look at these other people doing this. And I knew I was that other person, even though I was 11, and I knew I wasn't part of this. And so, you know, uh, that sort of stings, right? And yet, I'm relatively privileged, et cetera. So that led me to really think about how I dress, how I act, how I speak. So I remember for a year or two, I would only wear khakis because gay people wore jeans. Every single thing that I
Mm,
did, the shirts that I wear, the way that I walk, the mannerisms that I had were all constructed to hide, right? And I was so afraid to be emotive and to show any real emotions because, my gayness would come out, people would know. So that's sort of how, for me, early on, that's sort of how I functioned. And what that did for me was I used to describe myself as living within a box within a box, right? And then, and on all levels. So at one point I thought in terms of school, I was the dumbest of the smartest or the smartest of the dumbest, right? I always kept myself separate. And I think, one of the things that I did, which I think is really destructive, is so I got negative cues from my family and the world at large. But I think that internalized some pretty strong homophobia feelings that I had. And so what I did was I separated myself from other gay people. Well, I'm not as affected as them. And I don't know who Judy Garland is, or, whatever the references were, the way of behaving, I don't have that swagger. So I can be like, yeah, I'm gay, but I'm not like those gays, right? And I kept myself separate. So it's really hard for me, when I didn't feel a part of my, family of origin, my sort of community of origin. And then with gay people for a long time, I don't do drag. Like I would find all these ways to I'm separate from them, right? And so that led to a lot of loneliness, which led to, ways of thinking and action which weren't healthy. And so all of that, part of that is the reason why I started Hear Me, because I did all of these things to hide, like I just said, and also I found drugs and alcohol, which I believe literally when I was a senior in high school into college, it kind of kept me alive because I was able to sort of really escape and totally escape from my feelings. And then as I got a bit older, I discovered yoga and meditation, which was really great and it helped me a lot and it still does. But I became so good at meditating that I sort of hidden it, right? And I had what was called like spiritual materialism, where I'm better than everyone because I can drop down and really get into my head. And it was just also another way of keeping me separate. So ultimately, I decided the only way I'm going to actually get connected, I can't hide in drugs and alcohol because we all know where that led. It doesn't lead. I have all the stories, which I can share with you if you wanted to really know. And then I was sort of hiding in meditation, and I would go to ashrams and go to India, and I'd feel alone, right? I'd feel superior and alone. So, through the decades, I decided like the only way I'm going to really have connection, I can't hide anymore. And I have to try to break through. And that struggle lasted many, many years. And when I sold a business that I had, which is a restaurant business, I really made a decision that I have to find a way to become integrated. And so when I had the restaurant business, I was out to some people, I wasn't out to other people. It's a very sort of like, it was hard for me, right? And I'm in New York City, right? And I could come out to people that I work with, some people, and I always lived this weird compartmentalized life. So I tried really hard, and my goal was, I want to stop doing that. I want to be able to live fully and integrated. And remember, at this point, I've been married to the same man for 23 years. We have an 18-year-old son, and even with all that, it was still hard for me. So it's not for me. It wasn't an easy process.
whew. So that is like a lot of time, right? And a lot of, if we just even attach like some general understandings of the themes you talked about, like that is such a roller coaster. And before I move on, right, I got so excited to talk to you that I need to formally introduce myself. My name is BJ Watkins. I'm the head of community. We just like work way backwards. But also just, to honor the space, my pronouns are she, her, hers. Adam is a CEO and founder, and your pronouns are?
He, him.
Perfect. All right. So, I'm really curious because you have, right, the journey from your perspective. Um, with reflection, how do you think in terms of the connections you've made, the conversations you've had, as you've grown into your fuller self, what impact do you think that has on the broader experience of the LGBTQIA plus community? Like, for you, you did a lot of separation and compartmentalization, but what are some of the other experiences or stories or information that you have seen that kind of be common themes?
Well, so not to be negative, but I think because I think there is a positive spin to it, but the negative part is, um, a sense of really of not belonging. Like my son's adopted, and I've wrote a lot of books on kids that are adopted, and there's this wound, there's this like just complete separation, which becomes a part of who you are. So I think there's one of the things that I think is amazing is because for anyone that deals with struggles, whatever they are, there's a sense of empathy and understanding of the human condition that I think people that don't have similar struggles don't really have an understanding of, right? There's whether you're a Black person walking down the street, whether you're a gay person, whether all the whole vast humanity of experiences. I think there's an understanding of the human condition that you have based on your own experiences, which are very personal. So I think for LGBTQIA people, there's an empathetic energy that we have and an understanding because we deal with it as well.
So, you mentioned, right, like one of the ways that kind of, despite like where we know it leads, right, drugs and alcohol, to an extent, like saved your life, right? And so I'm curious about if you can talk about the risks that people, from within the community face as they try to come to grips with this core identity, right? A part of themselves that, as you said, like have a lot of negative cues or is not like broadly accepted.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, everyone has their own personal experience. And I think we all, we're all our own people. And there are some commonalities. I think that when you do come out of whatever your journey is, a lot of times, we haven't, as LGBTQ folk, we haven't had that ability to sort of have our first dates at 11 or 12, where not only were we not affirmed, we were negatively affirmed. Do you have a girlfriend, right? All those sort of things, right? And so our adolescence are sort of like, how do we learn how to date? How do we learn to be in communication with someone? Was really stilted, right? So, you when you decide to more actively come out, right? When you go through that process, and you sort of have this lost adolescence and this lost sort of like learning on how to date, how to be in the world, how to be sexually healthy. What does all of that mean for you? For many of us, we tend to go from like we pull back a rubber band, right? And we can, myself included, a lot of drugs, a lot of promiscuous sex, a lot of activities and behaviors, which, probably fun at the time, right? But it for me, a lot of the sexual acting out that I did, and I'm speaking primarily to men at this point. I can only sort of speak to that experience. I think there's a lot of damage done because we use sex as a way to connect with other people because it's like quick and easy, but it also can inhibit us from having true intimacy with other people. So I have this other company called Cuddlist, which is a professional cuddling platform, and our tagline for when I started it was, we're sex obsessed and touch deprived, right? And I think the fact that I think that's a common theme, especially I'm going to just keep it to gay men because I can only speak to that particular experience, that we engage in behaviors which can be risky, which can be somewhat dangerous. Again, they can be a lot of fun. And I think some of the behaviors that we do, that I did, really kept me from actually being in true communion with another person because I just, another way to hide. It was actually, for me, it was another way to sort of escape. So for me, part of my whole process was like developing healthy boundaries, going through that sort of experience of like, what is healthy and what's not healthy. And everyone has very different boundaries. So it's like, this is not any judgment on anyone's sexual behaviors. It's about what does it make you feel ultimately? So I wasn't feeling good. I was feeling really bad about myself. I was feeling, emptier after than before. So I don't know if that answered your question.
I mean, it does, right? Because it is unique to each individual. Some things I was thinking about, because you are, as you identified as a gay man, I'm thinking about, and you also naming like, and I'm 50, thinking about you're of a time, not, hold up. But I mean, like you have seen the journey, right, of us, of the community being more broadly accepted. But my understanding, and if I did the math right, like you basically have kind of seen like the AIDS crisis,
Yeah,
right?
so here's my journey, right? So I got out of college and I'm okay, I'm coming out and I moved to New York City in a few months. And AIDS became a real thing pretty much at that time, right? So what happened for me was, and my first roommate, I went with him to whatever hospital when he got tested. And he had, at the time, they called it AIDS related complex. It wasn't full blown AIDS, but it wasn't HIV positive. And it terrified me. And I remember he went to go to the bathroom and the counselor said to me, don't use this toothbrush, don't use it, all these things. And it just freaked me out. So here I am trying to come out and and yet if you tried to kiss me, like I felt like you were being unsafe. So it fucked me up, excuse my language. It really,
Yeah.
really laid into me hard. And so yeah, and I was a part of ACT UP and a part of and went to marches and all of that stuff. And yeah, we were hated. I mean, we were literally hated, and people were afraid of us. I mean, like there was fear, literal fear, and a sense of disgust. And that's real, and the amazing thing about it was the coming together of a community. I'm gonna cry because there really was that sense of we're coming together.
Yeah.
And we're and battling down the hatches, and we're fighting, and that's what happened. And it did change a lot, and it was really impactful. um, but it took a lot of effort, and a lot of people worked really, really hard, and a lot of people died, and it was a very scary time. So yeah, I'm grateful for all of the progress that's been made, and I think it's amazing. If you would have, marriage equality, all of it, um, and it's two steps forward, one step back. We're in a time right now where our rights are again feeling very threatened. So
Well, thank you for sharing that. Because I know that there's like a lot of energy and emotion, right, that's tied into such a pivotal time and space, within the LGBTQI plus community. And so, before I go into like our present time, right, despite this whole journey of really pushing forward, I'm kind of curious about when you actually like truly found like the LGBTQI like community. Did you immediately Was there ever a time where you like felt like, okay, I'm here, I'm home, I'm arrived, and this is a sigh of relief? Or have you kind of just still had some level of like compartmentalization to it? Or like it's only these kinds of like gays that I feel like, how did you find your footing within the umbrella, right? Where you finally like have landed? Like, can you talk about that?
yeah, again, it's a process. I'm trying to like figure out. It's not as linear as that. I definitely found my people, and I definitely found connected. I remember, I had a share in the summer house, and I felt at home, right? I felt like, I wasn't going to tea dance, I wasn't all that, but I felt like really safe in that environment. Um, so it was a process, and I still separated myself out, and I didn't talk a whole lot, but yeah, I was able to find my tribe after a while. And it's really funny. So now when we had our son and we moved to the suburbs in New Jersey, and my life became, your friends become kids, your kids at a playground, and you wind up meeting people, and who he goes to kindergarten with. And so weirdly for me, I felt most integrated in that sort of primarily hetero suburban environment. It felt like I almost wanted it to be. I remember wanting to feel more special, but it was relatively normalized in northern New Jersey, so I felt very at home. I think that weirdly enough, when I sort of moved out of the city and I started to live in the suburbs and sort of be parent focused, just you wind up having to do shit with your children is what it is, right? And so that felt for me very affirming, very natural. And that's, I think, when I started to get a lot more comfort. I think for me, because I realized I had a deep, like, not all straight people are scary, right? I wasn't really being, I mean, we had experiences here and there, but it felt like a very validating experience. And so for me, straight people, especially straight men, were like the other, right? And I was really separated. And so my sort of adult journey, 35 plus, is really like, you know, working on not otherizing people, because I was doing it as much as other people, right? And it was really more the demons in my head and my expectations versus what other people were feeling. And so I really learned that in suburban New Jersey.
You know, like healing is not linear, right? And so, um, I'm thinking about, you talking about like the original wound, and I'm thinking about, for parents, right? Like, what from your perspective, even though it's 2022, could we be doing differently to create a space where there's more empathy and understanding for people just to authentically exist?
Well, I would imagine if you sort of looked at the average 8-year-old, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 13-year-old, most of the questions that they're still getting are, heteronormative. Do you have a girlfriend? Isn't she pretty? I think girls are hearing, validated by looks. Boys are validated still by, boy, how's sports going, et cetera, et cetera. So I think from a gender perspective, and I know gender and sexual orientation are very different, but I don't know how much that has evolved. I think what's probably evolved more is, choosing it from the media and outside, right? It's like funny because I live in Baton Rouge now, which is, you don't see pride flags all over the place. And we were just in Seattle, every friggin' store had a pride flag and pride was all over the place. And my husband said to me, he goes, could you imagine this in Baton Rouge, right? And it's like, I can't because it's not here yet, so I don't know. I think a lot of people are better, quote unquote, and have learned a lot. But I don't think we're really there. And I think what happens with any movement is the further it goes, the more pushback it gets, right? Look what's happening with the Supreme Court, with abortion, with all these states pushing back and like books being, banned, and trying to do something about sort of like racial justice and the pushback and the vitriol. So I think it's I guess what does Dr. Martin Luther King say? The march is, the history bends towards justice, but I think it goes back and forth. And I think one thing I can say about people my age, especially LGBTQ plus people, is we fought really hard, and I think everyone has to find their way to fight and be part of a process. And yeah.
So kind of leaning into finding your way like as part of the process, right? And like figuring out like what you're going to lean into and what you're going to shift away from. How I'm trying to say this the right way. How did you determine with everything going on that it felt as safe as possible, or when did you know that it was okay for you to share this part of yourself in a healed space? So like, I guess I'm asking, when did you feel like, okay, I'm okay with coming out now because we're past the toothbrush and all this other activism, and now I can fully be this, live and lean into this part of myself.
So going sort of back to, so there, if I could speak, I would say, so, I was one of these people who had, in my 20s into my early 30s, had more sort of 3-week relationships, and I have a friend that said to me, you're going to die old and alone in a 1-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side. I'm like, I'm going to have a 1-bedroom, and so I had a lot of shame around being single. I had a lot of shame about being, one of these people that can't get it, right? And I have a lot of single women friends, and I know it's not only sort of like affects gay men, and I can't speak for gay women or bisexual women, but for me anyway, there was a lot of shame around being single because there was a lot of shame about not having a relationship. So, and I hope other people don't have to do this, but for me, it really wasn't until I found the person that I'm now with, and I was able to really feel what is it like to give and exchange love, and all these things that I sort of wanted. So it was really for me, I think the basics of like being with someone, learning how to be in a relationship, learning how to sort of have that kind of exchange, because I didn't think that was going to happen for me, and so I had as much shame around sort of the perpetual singleness and my not having the ability to find someone with being gay. And it was all tied together, right? Because it was like the gay was being judged and then the single part was hyper judged, and it was all sort of mashed together. So for me, it was really when, and I met my husband, my now husband, at 35. So really, that's what it really took for me. It took for me to oh my God, all these things, I can do this. I can actually be in a relationship. I can actually give and get love. And I think that for me was sort of beginning of the turning point.
I love that. Because I feel like, so people talk to me a lot like, when are you getting married? When are you do this? And I'm like, I keep thinking back, right, to like, I recognize that marriage between, queer LGBTQ people was just not normalized in any way. So when it comes to like, what did you think about your wedding? I'm like, I never thought about it because it like wasn't a thing. And I don't mean to look like, marriage is the worst thing in the world, but just thinking about how certain times of relationships or the ways that we can give and receive love, or even be affirmed, was just like not a thing for me. It was for other people, right? And so I think it's really nice to hear that you had a moment where it all kind of really pieced itself together. So you are basically living what to some people in like the queer community, like this is a wonderful success story, like he found love and this and that. But I'm curious about your perspective on the active erasure, like of us as individuals, right? Like we see Don't Say Gay and like what happened with the valedictorian who like had to alter, his speech to reflect curly hair, as a euphemism, and like the anti-trans legislature and all those things. And I'm thinking about like, in terms of mental health, right? And navigating just what you navigated in your own mindset, like what impact do you think that that has?
It's heartbreaking. I mean, it's absolutely heartbreaking. You know, if you're a trans kid and you literally being legislated out of existence, right? All of it's really hard and it's really damaging, and it creates, um, yeah, a way of feeling which can lead to a lot of various negative consequences. And you're loved, and it's like that's why we just have to be a force for good and let people know that you know you don't have you don't need a lot of people. You need one or two people. Like, one of the reasons I started to hear me, because I knew inherently there was nothing. Well, I didn't really know what therapy was, but I knew that if I could talk to some other gay kids, I'd be kind of fine, right? I knew there weren't going to be a lot of, but I just that was really hard. And so I think if we're lucky enough, or somehow we can find a person, some validation that our humanness and we're right, we are deserving of love like anyone else, right? And I think a lot of us don't feel like that. And I think when you get these cues, it's really damaging, and it's appalling. I don't really know what to say. I mean, it's horrible when you have these politicians and community people and school officials, and it's really, really damaging. And so all we can do, I think, and everyone should find what works for them, whether it's writing a letter to the editor, so I'm going to march, donating money, find something to be a part of the solution, because ultimately you're not going to feel better unless you do that anyway. And you never know how that's going to impact another person.
Yeah, I think that that is really important because for many people, right, it's not necessarily safe to be entirely out, and to really truly let people in. And so it's not so much like, I want to focus on like all the daunting pieces because this community is responsible at the intersection, of race, gender, all these things for significant growth. And so I think what's important, is leaning into like, well, what Hear Me does, right? And so what do you like? What role do you think that HearMe can play in supporting the LGBTQIA plus community?
I think we offer connection, and we offer a sense of here's another person. And I know from, many, many hours of being a listener, speaking to, you know, LGBTQ plus people, and I know it was helpful. And I mean, and part of it is, you think it's hard in this country. It is. I mean, I've spoken to people in a lot more, really, really harsh countries where it's illegal, or your family, really bad stuff. And it was a lifeline, right? It's a lifeline. So I think the work that we do is critical. And I think that normalizing conversation and connecting as many people as possible, the whole thing is a shared lived experience. So you can have that brief moment. I'm not wondering if this person's safe for me. They're safe for you. And so then you don't have to code switch, you don't have to think about it. And you can sort of get into the be not the best person, just be a person, right? Like there's that whole model minority thing where, and part of that was me too. I overachieved, it's like I tried really hard, and I hid in politics, I'm doing all of these things, and it's all ways of hiding, because, well, you have to compensate. So just talk to people, right? If you're not LGBTQIA and you're listening to this, just hear, I know we're having a conversation towards the end of the month on how to be an ally. Please go to that, but it's like just an understanding that other people don't have that experience, and there's a privilege. We all are on different levels of privilege, right? I'm a white man. I can go use a bathroom at a hotel. I can walk in and say, excuse me, where's your bathroom? They'll give me the friggin' key. BJ might not be able to do that, right? I can wear sweatpants and not shave for 3 days and not really think about it. Well, we all don't have the privilege to do that. So I think for all of us, recognizing where we are, and having some humanity around it. The thing that it's like that not understanding, that not sort of understanding of where we are and doing what we can do is really harmful. And, the gay community, it was, or, it took a while, and it's still taking a while to integrate the gay community, because we're creatures of our culture, right? And people are comfortable with who they're comfortable with. So it's up to us to work that much harder. Yeah.
So I was going to ask, what do you think is important for Hear Me listeners to know when supporting members of this community, right? And empathy is important. And really thinking about, from your point of view, if I'm a listener or I'm engaged in a conversation with someone who, is in, let's say, for example, a country where it is not safe, what kind of messaging or sense of affirmation do you provide underneath that type of dialogue, in that space?
I see you, I hear you, I validate you. I understand that what you're going through is really a big deal for you. And I read all of our reviews, right? And the best reviews are, they didn't judge me. They let me speak. They're like, literally, that's really what it's about. I don't read any reviews that say they, every once in a while you get, they gave me good advice, but 99% of the time, they let me speak. They let me vent. They didn't cut me off. Don't cut people off. Let them vent. Let them share their experience. And if you're a listener and you're having a moment about it, count to 3, right? Keep on putting, there's, I didn't invent it, but there's like the safe zone, the stretch zone, and the no-go zone, right? The safe zone is you're talking to someone you feel really comfortable with. The stretch zone is there's a little bit of uncomfortability, right? You don't feel completely yourself, right? But you stay in the game and you're a stretch zone. If you're in a situation where this feels unsafe for you, you tell the person, I appreciate you sharing, etc. I need to go now. Or you said, but I think every one of us, if you're a HearMe listener, you should be able to see someone for who they are, validate them, listen to them unconditionally, with positive regard, And, period. If someone's saying things that are offensive or, out of bounds, then you're not responsible for that. At that point, you're responsible for keeping yourself safe, right? For respecting your own boundaries. But in general, you listen, positive regard, with empathy, with understanding. Say thank you for sharing. Please tell me more. Thank you so much for sharing. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, I really I feel like that's also what's worked best for me, especially right as like a queer woman who's engaged in conversation with gay men. Like I find myself sometimes like in the stretch zone because like the experience on some level isn't always like relative. And I'm like, huh, okay, this is fascinating. So for me, like when I find myself kind of like, oh, I don't know, I'm hitting like a moment, it's kind of like I start turning to wonder and asking more questions, because that in that act, I start to find more connection with the person. So I really appreciate you taking us kind of just on this full journey, right? Of like, I got negative cues to like, I'm in a happy, loving relationship to now I've started this thing. And so we have come a long way. And I do believe that Hear Me plays an incredibly important role, because not everybody has access, right, to the type of community where they can have opportunities for feeling affirmed. All that being said, for the LGBTQIA plus community, where do you think we still need to go, and how does that translate into the broader landscape of how we operate as a society?
Well, just to give BJ a plug, we had we're a virtual team, and we got together in Baton Rouge a few months ago, 2 months ago, and people were using the vernacular, "Hey guys," right? And BJ called us on it. And that's how to really work on not gendering using gendered language. So we're a work in progress, and we're humans, and humans are fallible. So I think we can do our best to keep each other accountable without being mean about it. And in terms of how, one thing Hear Me has going for it is, three of our top leadership, including me, BJ, and Rick Jackson, are on the LGBTQI spectrum, right? And so I think in all decisions that we make, it just all has to be right there. Who are we hiring? How are we treating people? And I think it's an evolutionary process. I think you do not allow, you're really clear what is wrong. You coach and teach when appropriate. But I do love an expression, it's like Google's Google it isn't, everyone has access to Google, right? Figure it out. If you really care, figure it out. It's not up to anyone to sort of be the spokesperson for any community and answer any questions either. So just be a human, be aware.
Yeah, I think that's great. I feel like in this day and age, so many people, especially as we sat right through a panorama for feels like 3 years now, got a lot of information and a lot of opportunity to grow and expand. Um, but somehow in that new learning, right, people still are super afraid to make mistakes. And I think it's just important to say, like, you are fallible, you are going to make mistakes, but also like when you do it, it's okay, accept it, acknowledge it, move on. Because we're really trying to be better and foster deeper connections among us in the broader whole. So we're reaching that point, right, where like if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat for Adam or me. And then I'll also just provide an opportunity for people if they have a question to unmute themselves, and they can speak and use their own voice. So I think I also just want to say right now, like I'm really grateful that Hear Me exists. So it's kind of like also my plug for you because I think um, Hear Me has been a source of activism for me to support people from the community because I feel like being in the pandemic, that sense of connection has really changed, right? Like we had our own safer spaces, our brave spaces to go to and connect and commune and be together. And the pandemic like really took that away. And so I'm grateful that Hear Me exists, but I'm also curious, do you feel like um, that other queer people might be feeling like the same way because we're so like for the most part like really isolated, like do you have any understanding of like what coming back within community is going to look like?
No, I just all I can, to your point, we're evolving creatures, we're evolving humans, so we need to allow each other to evolve, and we need to call each other out as well, in as kind a way as possible, so we don't shut people down because we all have different experiences. I had a conversation with someone recently um, where I sort of called them out about something. And I got an email back saying my sister's trans, all of the stuff, and apologizing and sharing their story. So I said, thank you so much for sharing. So all of us are not, or in, all of us can say something that we shouldn't be saying every now and again, right? Um, so, the queer community is so vast and so varied. And I think, and generationally, it's so different. My hope is that there's more opportunities for as many people as possible to feel a sense of contentment, I feel a sense of community, I feel a sense of belonging. Um, yeah. And all I can do is kind of do what I'm doing and put out what I can put out. But I don't have, really don't have a sort of a clear view and like, what is a 22-year-old queer person feeling and how do they engage in community? I really, I don't know. I hope we can be there to support anyone that needs to be supported.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I see the questions rolling in, so I'm gonna, as you take the sip of water and prepare. So they're kind of very similar in the sense of, wondering what's the best way to respond to someone who is not supportive, right, of the LGBTQIA plus community, or feels like needs to change their mind, or if people are in conversation thinking that it's a hoax or mental illness. What pieces of advice or information can you share? Like, what's the best way to respond?
Yeah. So I guess the best way to respond is check yourself and what's available for you, right? How much space do you have for it? And it's okay to say, I'm not having this conversation, right? It's okay to say this is not okay, period. You don't need to engage if it's making you feel really uncomfortable or really unsafe. If you have the bandwidth to, um, then I think sharing personal story is real. I hear what you're saying. I understand that you think that, it's not a choice, it's a choice. This is my experience, right? I knew this. And to share your humanity to the best of your ability, because nothing will change unless we do that. And it's not a guarantee, right? I mean, I have a friend of mine, she's not a friend anymore, um, because she's, you know, she's I can't get past it with her. She knows my story, she knows who I am, and she's sticking to her thing. And I have a choice. I'm not. I wish you wish you the best, and I'll pray for you. Um, but as much as you have the ability to share a personal story, I think arguments don't really work. I mean, they don't. Unfortunately, it's really hard to argue when someone has a core value or they have a real way of thinking of something. It's really hard to argue. It's fun, and I love it. And I've been, and I'm smarter. But really, to make any impact, there has to be a sense of vulnerability from your part. Saying, what you're saying kind of hurts me because this is my experience, or thank you for having that feeling. This is my experience. I think ultimately that's the only way change is going to happen. Well, I think you need to fight. So I think there's a place for all of it. But on a
Yeah,
one-on-one situation, I think that's sort of it. If you feel safe enough, tell them your story.
Yeah, I feel like, I'm on the other end of the spectrum where I surprisingly I didn't have a lot of resistance. Like I knew when I was like 2, I was like, I'm different and we're about to be out here. And then, like, wait, let me rephrase that. Not be out here, but just like I knew that I was different and I kind of had a different experience right with the original wound. And it wasn't even so much from a family structure, it was more just being in the world and again being asked questions like, is that your little boyfriend? And I was like, absolutely not. But like, and so I feel like this is a common thing where I will never forget when I was like in high school and I graduated, I moved on to coaching high school basketball for like a year or so. And some freshman who was like now a junior or sophomore came up to me and was like, I just want to thank you because you made it so easy for me to be out because you were out. And I was like, actually, I wasn't. People just kind of like already made that association. Um, and so it was interesting to get into deeper conversation because there are a lot of people who have this core value that it's not normal, throws whether it's religion or some other belief system on top of it. And so I too have never found arguing beneficial. What I've always noticed to be the marker of change for people is the empathy, because it's like I have these views and now I have a child who's trans, or I have these views and now my sister just came out, or I have the, and so like I say all of that because I really agree with kind of your perspective on that. So I appreciate those two questions. Does anyone else have any other questions they want to drop into the chat? Please do so now. Otherwise, I'm going to give you a quick opportunity to unmute yourself, to just come off mic. Here we go. How to respond to someone from the LGBTQI plus community who thinks that their homosexuality is not logical, though they know that they are homosexual intuitively. So they had a person who wanted to change their homosexuality because they hate being a homosexual. So any thoughts or on
I
that?
mean, I would say it's really hard. I hear your struggle. I understand what you're going through. Um, yeah, I would validate their feelings. I mean, that may be how someone's going to feel, and maybe 2 years from now they'll feel a little bit different. You can validate as a human. No one is saying that unless there's a lot of internal struggle going on. That's not something that you say if you're happy. If you really want to change that, there's a lot of really sad feelings going on. So I hear you. What you're going through sounds really difficult. I think if you want to, I'm gay. I think it's totally natural and fine, but I hear it's really difficult. I know it's very difficult for other people, and I'm here for you. I'll listen to whatever you want to share about it. It's real. So you just validate them for who they are. We're all in different places. If you would have asked me, 10 years ago, would I be crying on a Zoom call in a company that I started about, validating each other, I would have said you're crazy, right? So we all have our journey, and we're all, give time, and let people evolve, and have compassion.
Yeah, I feel like the positive affirmation piece is really important, and affirming people in their position because they didn't get there on their own, right? They inherently learned very early on at some point, like who you are is not okay, and that you actually need to cramp yourself back into a box, a closet, whatever. And so I think affirming people to lean into their authentic selves, is, to the best of your ability, is all you really can do is, in my mind, plant other seeds, right? Because those are all seeds that are reinforced by different, power structures. But you have a unique opportunity as a listener when you're, speaking with someone to talk about your positive observations or affirming that, like, this is not an isolated thing. You're not the only person, who is going through this. And that, with some self acceptance, whatever that looks like for you, that you can build like the life that you feel happy about. Whew. I just think about like, reading this question because one thing I didn't touch on, right, is that, within our community, There are, trans women, especially trans women of color, right? There's a lot of harm that happens. And there's a lot of harm that, there's very real realities, and risks of being authentic, from just losing family to loss of life. And so thinking about how important it is just to try to affirm people while you can. So,
Yeah.
all right. Were you going to say something?
No, I agree. It's we can empathize, we can show support, but we're not walking in someone else's shoes. I don't know. I have an understanding, intellectual understanding of how difficult it is to be a trans woman of color, the issues relating to it and the safety issues, but I'm not in that shoe, but I can affirm, wow, I hear you. I understand that it's scary. Whatever it is, right? Just validate whatever they're saying, as long as it's making you, as long as you can do it with integrity, and stay curious.
That sounds amazing to me. All right. So this is where I'm going to ask if anyone actually has a question they want to come off mic for. Phil, please, now is your time to do so. I feel like I'm watching like Legendary and I'm like, any takers and like voguing my way, like voguing the house down to like actually get to 0 where we just. Okay. So first then, if no one has a question, I don't see anything else in the chat. Adam, I really thank you for your candor and openness and honesty, because so many things live siloed and people don't really get to have such authentic conversations, let alone with the CEO of multiple companies. Like, it just doesn't, it's not a normalized thing, right? Access is very unique to the HearMe experience. So I just want to acknowledge that. For everybody else that's on, I just want to say these conversations are just going to keep getting better. Next week, we'll be talking with a 2-time champion in multiple sports, Olympian. Like, she's amazing, but also noting, that she is a trans woman. And I think having that lived experience adds another layer to the conversation and understanding how we can lead with empathy. So if there's nothing else, everyone enjoy the rest of your day. Adam, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And
And I just want to shout out, this whole series that you put together. I know Chelsea helped you. I'm sure other people have helped you, but you spearheaded it, and it's really cool. Really cool.
yeah, I feel like sometimes we just need to have that lived experience, and also just acknowledging that if we're also siloed, we may not know, right? Because someone may still be gripping with, this is a part of my identity, and hasn't shared. Sometimes we may be encountering, people every day that we just don't know. So how can we be marginally better, right?
And then even just getting that email, the emails announcing this can be so validating and so important for some people. So not everyone speaks, not everyone shows up at events, but literally seeing it, like, wow, it's really important. And so, yeah, it's always hard because you think about how many people struggle with this and that, but you never know the touch points, right? And sometimes the deepest touch points are ones you will never know about, but someone getting that and seeing it is really can have a major impact for them.
Cool. All right, y'all. So we'll catch you next Wednesday, same time. I'm excited for this person because they are just all around amazing and just keeps racking in medals. But, the experience is different and unique for them. So can't wait to hear about it. Everyone have an amazing day, and we will catch you on the flip. Bye, y'all.
Thank you so much. Bye.